This meeting has begun.
Well, hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first Friday webinar of 2017. My name is Brian Kerrick from the University of Washington. I'm the president-elect for Northwest ACUHO, and I'm joined today by my colleague and friend Craig Whitton from the University of Alberta, who's president for Northwest ACUHO. And this morning we're excited to share with you our presentation on personal and professional financial literacy. Craig, take it away.
Fantastic. Thanks, Brian. We're really excited to be sharing this topic with you, and judging by the number of people that are here today, it seems like we've hit on a pretty popular topic, particularly right after the holidays. Now, I'm sure this is something that everybody can relate to. You're at a credit, having a credit card or a debit card declined at a store or restaurant. Maybe you're stressed about, which bills you have to pay, or maybe you've overspent your budget or whatever the case may be, so you can't afford to pay a bill. Maybe you're thinking about your future financial situation, like retirement or something like that, and then you're like, no, I'm just going to ignore that for now because that's too scary. In general, maybe you just want a better understanding of managing your own money and finances. And if any of those things apply to you, then this session hopefully will give you some insight in exactly how to do that.
So a little bit about us. My earliest memories of money management are pretty simple. I earned paychecks umpiring Little League and working at McDonald's in high school, and I spent those paychecks. The money came in, and then I spent it. I wasn't worried about anything really beyond that month. In college, I took several accounting courses, and this, for me, was the first time I was introduced to a deeper level of financial literacy. Since that class, I've kind of been managing a 10-year pro forma. It's the same one I started years ago, and that's for my personal situation. I've continued to evolve and tweak my strategies and practices with regard to savings and budgeting as I'm exposed to new ideas through conference presentations such as these, presentations in general, blogs, and magazines.
And my story is not dissimilar from Brian. It just took me an awful lot longer to get my stuff together with regards to my financial management. And a lot of it came down because I really love traveling, and it costs money to do that kind of stuff. In a previous career, I did work in financial services, specifically insurance and that kind of stuff. We're not going to get into that today. But basically, I spent money horribly irresponsibly in my youth, and it took me a very long time to crawl out of it. And if basically I'm a walking model of what not to do, but I'm also an example of that there's hope for everybody. So it doesn't matter how bad you are managing your money right now or how little you feel like you understand. If I can do it from my financial situation, then I'm absolutely confident that you can as well. So some of the outcomes for today's session is basically we want you to be able to articulate the principles of basic personal financial literacy, things like household income, expenses, investment, savings, debts, and that kind of stuff. We're also going to be engaging in finance conversations within your department to use the language and concepts used for personal financial literacy. So you'll find that the concepts for personal financial literacy are very similar to the concepts in your professional world. In fact, a lot of them are exactly the same. So we hope to equip you with enough tools for both avenues. So some statistics for you to review. Money is one of the most stressful things in people's lives. So if you find yourself stressed about money, don't worry, you're not on your own. In the United States, more than half of all Americans said that they were stressed about money in the last month, and almost a quarter of them said they were extremely stressed about money. Just over a quarter said they had low to no stress. So this is a normal thing to be stressed about money, and if you're feeling that way right now, or if you have felt that way, hopefully this helps normalize it a little bit for you. In Canada, in terms of what people identify as being the most stressful thing, money's pretty high. In fact, it's almost as high as relationships. And money also, we have some statistical data that suggests money is one of the key drivers of stress in relationships. So that's something else to keep in mind. Whether that's with your partner or your family or whatever the case may be, most fights come about because of questions around how we're going to spend our money today or tomorrow or a few months from now. 31% of couples clash at least once a month because of money. That's a crazy high number when you think about what people typically fight about. In the US, there are couples who are not open about their finances. Only about 30% argue rarely about money, which means 70% argue a lot about money, more than rarely, either moderate or a great amount. For couples who engage each other in finances and communicate about money regularly, over 58% argue about money rarely. So that basically means less fights and less stress if you're more open in communicating about money. And finally, almost 87% of Canadians wish they had made better financial decisions. I have an exact replica of an Indiana Jones hat that sort of reflects on that. So that's something that I think we can all relate to. Wish we had made better financial decisions at some point in our lives.
We're going to use some terms such as revenue and income. These terms are often used synonymously to describe money coming in through paychecks or otherwise. In some cases, though, income is used to describe the result of revenue, the money you make, less your expenses, the money you spend. But in either case, the income or the revenue is the money coming in. You may also hear the term combined household income. This is the value equal to the total amount of income earned by anyone living in your home or dwelling. The way we spend our money varies greatly from person to person. So some of us are more frugal than our friends. Others of us don't mind a shopping spree or two each month. However you spend your money, the money you are spending is reducing your income in the form of an expense. There are several types of expenses. We have our variable expenses that change based on our use or frequency, perhaps an electric bill. Others are fixed expenses, such as Comcast Internet and cable, rent, things that are going to be the same price every month no matter how much we use them. Within those, there are also the required expenses, things like insurance premiums, groceries you need to eat. But these are the expenses where you have a little bit less control. There's also the expenses where you have a bit more control on a monthly or annual basis. These are things like entertainment, vacations, etc. The quickest way to evaluate your current financial situation is to check that you have more money coming in than you're spending each month. So, how are you keeping track of all this stuff? Today we're going to introduce and discuss several budgeting tools. As we review these, you may hear the terms debit and credit. These are slightly different from the plastic in your wallet. These are accounting terms where a debit transaction takes money out of your income and a credit transaction adds money. The easiest way that I remember this in terms of terminology is that we often receive a credit back to our account. And that's a pretty accessible term, meaning the money's coming back to us. If we get a refund, credit's going to be placed on our account. And that's how I remember the difference between debit and credit from the financial standpoint. Whichever budget tool you end up using, it will help you track your income, expenses, and debt for your planning purposes. And so how are you going to do this? There's a few different options. You could use an Excel spreadsheet, a very common method. It's one of the two methods that I use personally, especially for tracking long-range data. If you're looking at a 10-year pro forma and looking at what the impact of an individual monthly decision is going to be over 10 years, Excel can be really powerful and handy for that. There's also several softwares out there that we're going to cover. There's also applications for your phone or mobile device that allow you to do some pretty easy monthly monitoring as well of your spending. And ultimately, it doesn't matter how you do it, even if you use paper. That'll help you get it done. The takeaway is that you're tracking that money. Here's an example of an Excel spreadsheet. Again, what's nice about Excel is that you're able to kind of set that up for yourself and really make it personalized to you. It's likely to be what you are using at work as well for your departments or departmental budgets. And it's easy to use. It's going to be a familiar interface, something that you're comfortable with. One of the cons with using an Excel budget is that it requires that disciplined, accurate entry of expenses. It's not going to do anything for you automatically. If you forget to put in that expense, it won't be in there. And so associated with that, that can take some time. There's also these software applications that are available to use. And we're going to discuss a few of them here. There's a lot out there, but we're going to discuss Mint, YNAB, and Good Budget. YNAB is Craig's personal preference. Craig, can you talk a little bit about this?
Absolutely. So YNAB is really, it's very accessible. It's about $60 a year, so you want to make sure that you account for that in terms of a subscription service. But as Brian said earlier, you've got your income and your expenses. Now, every dollar you spend is a choice that you are making. You need a budget forces you to choose how you're going to spend every single dollar that comes in. So if you look on this screen at the top, you've got $400 to be budgeted. YNAB forces you to sit down and say, of that $400, I'm going to put 50 in a software subscription, student loans into 300, and as soon as you put money into those things, it takes it out of your to be budgeted category. I use this exclusively, and just as a general question, it's rhetorical because we don't expect anyone to answer it, but how many folks have had to check their bank account before making a purchase of some kind? Probably quite a few of you. So since I started using YNAB, I check my bank account once a month, and I use the You Need a Budget app to see if I have money for that. So if it's a personal expense, something that I'm spending for fun, before I spend that money, I just take a look at my phone and I find out if I have money available. As soon as I log the transaction, it takes it away from the money I have available, and it's taken care of. So it's very intuitive, very easy to use, and it's more, again, a philosophy towards budgeting, which I really like. Very accessible and very simple. They also do a bunch of webinars to teach you a bit more about your budgeting process and how to understand your money a little bit better. So it's a really holistic approach to helping you manage your money better.
Thanks, Craig. If maybe you've never budgeted before, maybe you're simply spending and you know approximately how much you spend each month, but you couldn't really explain to somebody how much you spend a month on groceries, utilities, etc. Mint could be a really good option for you. So Mint will allow you to connect your bank accounts or connect your credit card accounts to its software. It's powered by Intuit, which does TurboTax as well, so it's relatively secure. And what's great about Mint is that it will categorize your expenses for you. So it will say, as you can kind of see from the screenshot here, here's how much you spent on fast food and restaurants, alcohol, laundry, going to the gym in the last month. You can then also expand that out to look at the quarter or the annual expense picture. And this can be really helpful for a starting point when you're looking at budgeting for the first time, is understanding, becoming self-aware of where your money is going, but also budgeting appropriately for things maybe like utilities that you don't have a lot of control over. So if you're spending $87 a month on utilities, $90 might be the right budget for your utilities. But once you've got your budget set up and you kind of know what you're spending and what you want to be spending, I really like Good Budget. Good Budget formerly was called the Easy Envelope Budgeting app, EBA. And this app is really based on the cash model of envelope budgeting. So if you are a cash-only type of person, or if you've had trouble overspending on a monthly basis, one of the common forms of advice is to just go to a cash budget. Stop using plastic because it's a lot more substantial to pass over a $5 bill than it is to slide your debit card. What Good Budget does is allows you the benefits of using your card, the convenience, if it gets stolen, you're not out anything, with the discipline of an envelope cash-based system. So what this allows you to do here in the screenshot, you'll see that we have $150 budgeted for groceries, $65 budgeted for gas, etc. And then whenever I log a transaction in the top right, I just push the new transaction button. I'll be able to say, hey, I went to Costco, I spent $50, and I'd like that to come out of my groceries envelope. Then you're going to see that little kind of a hash line midway through that line. What that's showing you is where in the month you are, how many days are remaining as it closes to the left. And then the solid fill bar is where your money's actually at. So you can see in our example here, we've overspent on entertainment. And again, that can be a nice signal that we either need to budget or cut down on our expenses to ensure that we're meeting our pro forma, so to speak. Good Budget is also really helpful for a pro forma because you're able to track your monthly expenses. You can see the all envelopes. There's a small gray bar in the header that says all envelopes 67604, showing you what's their total, and that can be a really great way to track your quote-unquote monthly expenses within a bigger spreadsheet tracking an annual picture or a 10-year picture, is to say, oh, I'm going to spend $676 a month on my monthly variable expenses. And that can be one line in your spreadsheet, but then when you come back to your app, you can really track that microdata and really make sure that you're staying within that. Again, paper budgets are just fine if that's what you're comfortable with. Every budget's going to work the same way. It's going to help you categorize your spending. It's going to help you record a planned amount for each category. And it's going to help you record the actual amount spent, showing you if you're spending more than you're earning or if you're able to put stuff away as you planned. So how do you know how much to budget? There's a few things. You can look at historical data. Again, if we're spending $87 a month, $88 a month every month on our utility bill, then if there's not a lot of control we have over that, then that's your budget. So using historical data to look back and say, okay, this is what we need to make sure we're setting aside, and as you look forward, this is how much we should realistically be planning to lose each month expenses, because if we're not budgeting this much, our projections won't be accurate. If you have a little bit more control over your choices, such as going out to eat, going to the movies, that kind of thing, one of the really popular models is a 20-30-50 model is what they call it. And what this means is that you take your money after taxes, so the money that actually falls into your checking account after payday, and you put 20% of that into savings, you took 30% of that and you spend it on whatever you want, and then the other 50% covers your needs. And typically your needs are going to include rent, utilities, Comcast, cable internet, groceries, that kind of thing. So things that you really need. So then the wants comes back to a type of well, if we want to go out to the movies, if we want to plan a vacation, that kind of thing is where you can budget in there. What I really like about the percent model for budgeting is that it ensures that as you get pay raises or as you get bonuses over the years, you're always saving 20% of it. And so you don't have to make a conscious decision that, oh, I got a $100 a month raise, I really should be putting half of that into my savings account. Instead, you can just feel good knowing that whatever money you make, 20% is always going into savings. And therefore, when you receive a merit raise, that money, you're automatically increasing your savings within that 20% margin. You can also look at different things. Craig and I have recommended just Googling it. If you're really wondering, what should I be spending for my city on rent? Google it. Find out what the median home prices or mortgage payments or rent payments are in the area, and check yourself that way. But whatever works for you, it's your money and it's your budget. So the budgeting is really important when you start talking about the power of time. Budgeting with a long term in mind can have some significant effects. So for instance, let's decide we're going to spend an extra $90 a month on coffee. It's about, $3 a day. We justify it to ourselves. We say, you know what? I work really hard and I really want to have that iced latte in the morning. I don't care if it's a little expensive. $3 a day, I make a lot of money. I don't want to worry about $3 a day. So what's nice of this is if you're budgeting, if you're maybe tracking this in EBA or Good Budget app along with your 10-year Performa, you're going to create a new monthly budget. You're going to say, okay, I want $90 a month to go towards coffee in the morning. And then you're going to go to your Excel spreadsheet and you're going to put in this new monthly expense and drag it from January to December. And then that's going to update for all 10 years, perhaps within your tabs. And when you go back to look at your cumulative savings 10 years from now, you're going to realize that you're almost $11,000 in the hole. And you're going to look at that and go, where did $11,000 go? I was going to have enough money for a down payment by then. And you realize that that small $3 a day decision actually had a pretty substantial impact. And so this is a really, really powerful way to evaluate new expenses in your life, especially the voluntary ones. When you're looking at investing in Netflix and it's $10 a month, you might make that decision as you calculate it out saying, all right, $120 a year, so I'm talking $1,200 over the course of 10 years. Yeah, that's worth it. That's going to save me some money going out to the movies. That's going to save me money on my cable bill. I'm going to spend $1,200 over the next 10 years to have this luxury. But you might not make the same decision with your coffee. You might decide, you know what, I can join that coffee club at work or make it at home before I go in and have an $11,000 buffer over the next 10 years. There's also this idea of keeping up with the Joneses. If you haven't heard this term before, it's essentially related to your friend next door got the brand new iPhone and now you need it too. You got to keep up with everybody else. Somebody bought a new car, you got to get a new car. You've been in the same job as them, you deserve it. This is a great example I happened to stumble across on LinkedIn last week, and so we kind of see we've got driver number one driving the Corolla. He's paid it off and he's got a 2-bedroom house paid for. He's making $30,000 a year. He's got excellent credit. Driver number 2, he's driving the Benz. He's got 3 years left on that lease or loan, and he's got a 7-bedroom house with hundreds of thousands of dollars left on that mortgage. He's making $200,000 a year, but he's got poor credit. So it's an interesting point here. The LinkedIn snap says, sadly many people would choose to be driver number 2 because of what it looks like, in spite of the reality that driver number 1 is more wealthy. Your circumstances will never change until your thinking has changed. And I think this is really interesting. I also read something recently that did a research study on who felt rich. How much money do you need to make in an annual salary to feel rich? And so they did this quantitative study, and what they found was that there was no correlation between people that made $30,000 and $500,000 a year. There was no correlation that everyone making this much money felt rich. They felt like they had enough money. However, when you looked at their savings accounts, when you looked at that same group of people and said, and how much money do you have in your savings? The folks with the most money in their savings accounts, regardless of their annual salary, felt the richest. They felt like they had the most money. They felt like they were comfortable. And that drives home this point is, driver number 1, he may not be as flashy, but he doesn't have those extra expenses that driver number 2 has. So a takeaway, no matter what system you use, make sure you're tracking your income and expenses. Make sure that you know the impact of that morning coffee, and make sure that you're really looking at those future plans. What's really great about something like a 10-year Performa is that by making a decision to save $11,000 over the course of 10 years by not having coffee in the morning, every morning you don't have coffee, it's not a micro, feeling of emotion where you say, oh boy, I really, really wish I could have gotten coffee this morning. My life isn't too great. Instead, you can look ahead and say, hey, the money that I'm saving every morning by having coffee at home is going to allow me to purchase my home in 10 years. And that can be a really powerful feeling.
And that tracking piece too that Brian's talking about is so important, because a lot of the time it's the, well, I might as well, it's only attitude that really adds up. I might as well, it's only $3, or I might as well, it's only $10. That stuff adds up really, really quickly. And it's a habit. That's the other part of this. When you're in the habit of spending that kind of money in a might as well fashion, you end up spending more money than you earn, or you end up spending money and making choices with your money that maybe don't fit with what you actually want to be doing. The key thing with good budgeting is it's a habit. And so budgeting allows you to make choices with what habits you want to encourage. And then tracking in your budget also helps you encourage those habits and keep yourself accountable to them. Once you start tracking your money effectively, you're going to find all sorts of money that you didn't think you had. For instance, when I first started using Windab, my wife and I started using it, and we thought we were pretty good at budgeting with the Excel method previously, but even still there'd be, $5 here, $5 there, those morning coffees would get by us. In the first month of tracking every single transaction, we found $400. We've been able to repeat that every month since then, and we actually completely funded a rather opulent Christmas for my whole family out here in Edmonton, based on just found money from tracking our dollars, because all of a sudden we were making better choices. Maybe I don't need to spend that $4 today on the coffee, or maybe we don't need to order takeout. We can instead cook something from our freezer within our budget. So it can make a huge difference. And once you start tracking it, you're set up to be able to save it. Some of you might have heard of the concept of the wealthy barber. So that was a really successful book a little while ago about this idea of this barber who's retiring, but he's retiring, he's a millionaire, and none of his clients can figure it out. And his idea was he always pays himself first. So this speaks a little bit to Brian's 20, 30, 50 model, I believe it was, that he was talking about earlier. The idea is that no matter what happened in the barber's life, he always put a few bucks aside in a savings account, and he saw that as him paying himself. Over time, through the power of compounding interest, and we'll talk about that later on, that became a significant little nest egg of money. Something to keep in mind in terms of saving is you want to make sure that your savings aren't as accessible as your day-to-day funds. So you always want to make sure you have enough money in your pocket to be able to live, but your savings account, my savings account is in a separate bank that I don't have a debit card for, so the only way of actually accessing it is going in and talking to somebody. That means that I'm less inclined to pull open the mobile app and move money around when I'm out and about and deduct those savings. Also, through my work, there's a pension matching opportunity, and that obviously is inaccessible to me entirely. The other thing to keep in mind is keep an eye out on fees. So if you're a debit card only type person, take a look at the kinds of accounts you have. My previous bank, I didn't realize it until I actually got serious about budgeting about 6 years ago. My previous bank, I was paying over $40 a month just in transaction fees on a low month. On a busier month, those fees could be as high as $90 to $100, because every time I used my debit card, they were charging me a fee. I've since moved to a new bank, which is zero fee, and you can find them in Canada. That's Tangerine or President's Choice, and I know there's options as well in the United States. You do tend to sacrifice having a brick and mortar establishment in some cases, but typically those fees really add up over time. Once you start saving, in my opinion, your first savings goal should be to have an emergency fund. So before you start saving for a vacation or before you start saving for that new car, set aside money that can cover all of your living expenses for a period of about 6 months. Now that might seem really, really daunting, so start smaller. Say, I want to make sure that I have enough money to make sure that I can pay my bills next month. That's 1 month worth of savings. Once you've reached that goal, move on to 2 months. Because what happens if you need money for surgery, or what happens if a relative or friend passes away and you need to attend a funeral? What happens if you get stranded somewhere and you need to rent a car or get a hotel room for while you wait for your car to get repaired? So all of those things come up, and what people naturally do is they reach for the Visa or the MasterCard. And as soon as they do that, because it's sort of on credit, they don't typically pay it down right away. And depending on your credit card, you're going to be paying between 14 and 20% interest on that amount of money. If you have an emergency fund, it allows you to pay cash, which means you're not accruing debt, you're paying cash out of your emergency fund, and it allows you to weather things a lot more easily. To give you a really good example of things where emergency funds can come into play, when I was on vacation, my motorcycle broke down and I critically needed parts. By not having to put it on credit, I had my credit card completely clear, which meant that when later in that vacation we had another emergency, then I had already exhausted my emergency fund for the trip, then I was able to access my credit. Because it was my first go-to, I had that much more of a buffer. If I didn't have that, the trip would have been over. I probably would have had to have abandoned the motorcycle and found another way home. All sorts of disastrous things would have happened. So that emergency fund is critical. General rule of thumb, again, is 6 months, but if you can only do a month, that's a good place to start and build it up. The key thing here is you have to adjust your habits to match what your real-world experience will be like. So I know a lot of our attendees right now are probably living in or potentially living in, which means that you don't pay rent or you get a meal plan or you get all these other sort of perks. Adjust your habits now so that when you transition out of a live-in situation, you're easily able to do that. Figure out what the average monthly rent is in your area and put that away into savings every single month. Even if you're on a meal plan, figure out what your grocery budget would typically be. And you can do that again by Googling and figuring out what typical grocery budgets are in the area. And again, put that into savings every month. When you eventually move out, you'll have a nice little nest egg of money to not only allow you to get an apartment or a condo or a house or whatever the case may be, but you won't be used to having that money in your account. And that means you won't be having to do a drastic lifestyle shift. My wife and I did this when we moved out. We were able to move from our on-campus accommodation to our off-campus, and we were able to buy a house right away. And we had no really meaningful change in our lifestyle. If we didn't have that little nest egg set aside to do that, our lifestyle would have been drastically different. And so that made it really, really easy for us to make that transition. And if you're living in right now, I'd recommend you do that as well. Other big life changes can come through. Let's say maybe you're planning on having a child in the next year or two. Start setting aside what you think that baby will cost you if you can, so that it's not as much of an adjustment when the baby arrives. It can really, really help with that financial burden. Big life changes are stressful enough. You don't need to add on extra stresses with the financial piece. So again, the big takeaway here is have some cash available to cover emergency expenses in a savings account that you can access easily enough to use it in an emergency, but not so easily that you use it every single day. So one of the things we do want to talk about is the idea of debt and credit. So we've talked a little bit about debit and credit, but keep in mind this is a different sort of use of similar terms. So when your income, that means the dollars that you're taking in, is less than your expenses or the dollars that are going out, you are going into debt. So some debt is okay. So for instance, if you're buying a house or if you're getting a reasonably good car loan or whatever the case may be, that debt is okay and can actually be beneficial. Everybody has what's called a credit rating, which is essentially what people look at before they loan you money. If you have a good credit rating, you are more likely to get a loan, like a mortgage or whatever the case may be. If you have a bad credit rating, you are less likely to get a loan. Or if you do get a loan, you'll be paying a lot more for it. Bad debt, what I would call bad debt, are things like credit cards or excessive car loans. Those kinds of things are really, really expensive. Now, a lot of people will be familiar with what a payday loan is. Basically, you go to one of these Money Mart or Cash Now places, and you go in and you say, I want to borrow $1,000. And they say, sure, we're going to loan you $1,000 to get you through to your next payday, but you're only going to have to pay us like $100 for the privilege or whatever that case may be. Now, a lot of people look at these kinds of organizations. They say that's unethical, that's taking advantage of people and everything else. And they have these conversations while they're sitting at a fancy restaurant charging the meal to a credit card that's charging them 22% interest. And so while the terms are different in terms of the length of time, we have a socially acceptable use of things like credit cards, whether it's your MasterCard, your Visa, or Amex. But then we also sort of frown upon these payday loan places. But at the end of the day, every time you take out a loan, you are paying for that privilege. So when you charge something to your credit card, it's costing you money. So zero debt being carried is best. And what I mean by that is if you've got a mortgage or whatever the case may be, that's fine because a mortgage is an investment in some ways. You buy a house with the idea that you buy it today, you'll sell it for more later on, and we'll get more into that later on. But if your credit cards aren't zeroed out, that's costing you money every single month. So try and pay off your cards in full every single month. It's a good idea to keep an eye on points cards and reward programs. I know Brian is really, really good at looking at those different opportunities and taking advantage of them. If you can't manage credit, don't use it. So Brian mentioned the envelope method, and that's basically where you take cash out of the bank every month, and you say that I'm going to spend $200 on groceries, and you literally take a paper envelope and you put $200 of cash in that envelope. Then you say I'm going to spend $50 on my personal expenses, and you put $50 in a second envelope in that. Once those envelopes are empty, guess what? You can't buy any more things. So that's really what it comes down to. It's a good way of forcing yourself to managing your money a little bit better. That's a really great way to get off the dependence on credit cards. The other option is, again, as we mentioned earlier, using your debit card in conjunction with a budget software, whether that's Good Budget or YNAB or whatever. That's another way of making sure that you're very disciplined to using cash as much as possible. The key thing there, as we already mentioned, is watch out for transaction fees. So one of the questions that people have a lot is what should come first, having an emergency fund or getting out of debt? And it really does depend on your situation. But let's talk a little bit about what happens if you have debt. So it's discouraging. If you have debt and you've got, let's say you've got $8,000 on a credit card and you've only got $3,000 coming in and $2,500 of that is just your living expenses. There's no way you're going to pay off that debt this month. And it is discouraging. That's one of the most wrenching feelings ever. I remember when I first started budgeting and I looked at my student loans and some credit card debt I was carrying and all this kind of stuff a few years back. It was so depressing to know that I would be carrying that debt for potentially years. And it's really, really tough to sort of get around that. But again, it's a habit. And if you keep it the habits, you start seeing progress. So if you have a lot of debt right now, there's a couple of different ways you can pay it down. Two of the most popular ways are the snowball method and the avalanche method. So they are the same in concept, but they're a little bit different. If you've got 5 credit cards, each of them will have a minimum payment. The snowball method means you take the one with the lowest balance. So let's say 4 of your 5 credit cards have $1,000 on them, but one of them only has $200 on it. You make the minimum payment on the 4 out of the 5, and then you tackle the the lowest amount debt as quickly as you can. So every spare dollar that you have, because remember now you got a budget, you're tracking every dollar that you're spending. So hopefully you can find a few spare dollars in there. Every spare dollar you have goes to eliminating that debt. Once that debt is 0, you take the second lowest debt. Once that debt is 0, you take the third lowest debt. Now the nice thing about that is that every time you eliminate a debt, the amount of money you're spending on that gets rolled into your second lowest debt or your third lowest debt. And as you go, it's like rolling a snowball down a hill. The avalanche method is very, very similar, except instead of using balances, it looks at interest rates. So there are advantages to the avalanche method. In other words, you will pay off your debt faster and you'll spend less money on interest usually with the avalanche method. However, the snowball method can be really good for your morale because you'll see those debts getting eliminated one after the other after the other. The most important thing you can do with your debt, though, is to stop acquiring it until you can manage it well. So I would strongly encourage you, and there's lots of different ways you can do this, but if you've got credit card debt that feels overwhelming, stop acquiring credit card debt. Do whatever you need to do to stop acquiring it until you can manage it well. Treat your debt like a financial emergency. That means you want to get rid of it as quickly as possible, and that means you sacrifice the $3 a day coffee habit. Or maybe that means you take a look at where you're living to make sure that maybe you get a roommate to pay down a little bit of debt faster, or maybe you go to a cheaper apartment or whatever the case may be. Treat your debt like an emergency. Today it's going to be a lot of work and it's going to seem really, really discouraging. But and you know what? That's going to continue tomorrow, the day after, the day after. But you 5 years from now will look back on your financial situation and you will see genuine progress, and that feels really, really good. So we'll talk a little bit about why debt is an emergency. So folks who don't understand interest rates, this is something you want to really pay attention to. Debt is costing you money. So the example we have on screen is a really good way of spelling it out. A lot of credit cards, particularly bank cards, charge about a 14% interest rate. It's also called an APR, annual percentage rate. And let's say you've got a balance on one of those cards of $3,000. In first year, if you don't pay down that debt, you're getting charged $420 just for that balance. That's $420 for $3,000 worth of stuff that you may or may not still have, or whatever the case may be. $35 a month, which is, that's the cost of a nice meal or a few drinks out with friends or whatever the case may, whatever you're looking at, whatever you're interested in. In year 2, you're being charged about $480 for that debt. So that's $40 per month, and that's $480 on top of the $420. So we're already at $900 in 2 years just by carrying around that $3,000. That increase of $40 is what's called compounding interest. So with the above example, a lot of people, that's okay, I make my minimums, therefore I've got, I'm financially responsible because I'm paying the minimum payment that it says in the statement. With the above example, your minimum payment would typically be about $65, and that would take you 4 years to pay it off. In that time, you would have given the credit card company $2,000 in interest. So your $3,000 in credit card balance will cost you an additional $2,000 for a total of $5,000 to use your credit card instead of paying cash. If you paid cash, that'd be $2,000 in the bank account. When you think of it that way, it's similar to Brian's example earlier of thinking of budgeting long term. He's talking about $10,000 over 2 years. This is a similar amount of money. This is a lot of money that you're paying to interest, and all it's doing is making the credit card companies richer and making you have less money. So the average American, let's put this into real terms for you. The average American has 3.6 credit cards, and that means that they carry about $16,000 worth of debt. So that's average. Some people will have more than that. Some people will have less. In year one, that becomes $18,000. In year two, it becomes $20,793. In 5 years, that $16,000 balance more than doubles to $30,806. Sorry, just less than doubles, but it's pretty close. See, this is why I'm not very good at budgeting, why it's been such a habit for me. I'm terrible at math. But you get the idea. This money adds up really, really quickly. If you're making minimum payments on that $16,000 of debt, it's going to take you 19 years to pay it off. That's over $30,000 paid in interest, just in interest. It's a crazy amount of money that you could use for a lot of other things. To put it into perspective, if you were in Canada and you decided today that you were going to pay off all your debt and have a kid, you would have enough cash in the bank to pay for that kid's education at around the time that they go away to school. That's a crazy amount of money when you're thinking about paying interest to credit card companies. So again, treat your debt like an emergency and try and zero out your credit cards as quickly as you can. If you carry high interest debt, you're sacrificing things. That's really what it comes down to. Remember earlier we said every dollar you spend is a choice. If you're carrying credit card debt, it means you're choosing to give money away to the credit card company instead of choosing to spend that money on yourself for things like vacation or cars or houses or education or whatever the case may be. You'd be better off lighting it on fire because at least then it would keep you warm. The way you're doing it right now, if you're carrying high interest debt, you are just giving it away to folks who don't need your money because I guarantee you they got lots from everybody else.
So we're going to talk a little bit about investing. Investing is spending money today that you hope will turn into more money later when you sell it. There's a few different ways we invest. We might invest in the stock market, such as the New York Stock Exchange or the Toronto Stock Exchange. We might invest in mutual funds, which are a collection of several stocks bundled together into one bucket that's managed for you. We might deposit our money into a Roth individual retirement account or a tax-free savings account in Canada. We might deposit our money into a certificate of deposit or a guaranteed investment certificate in Canada. These accounts are similar to savings accounts, and in exchange for a higher interest rate, you are required to keep your money in the savings account for anywhere from 1 to 10 years. And finally, we might be looking at a high yield savings account. For instance, in the States, Discover's savings account offers nearly a 1% annual return on the funds in there. And so if you're looking for something that you don't want to manage, but you want to do better than the 0% you're getting in your checking account, high yield savings account might be the right option. Let's just talk about the stock market just for a little bit. The stock market is open for a select period each day from 6:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. Pacific time. It's open Monday through Friday, closed on weekends and most holidays. The general idea is to buy low and sell high. If you're interested in investing in Microsoft, you want to have bought it at $3 a share and sold it for $100 a share. There are fees associated with each transaction that you make. Typically, it's around $8.95 per bundle of stocks that you purchase, and then you'll pay that again when you sell. There's a rule called T+3. It refers to how long you have to wait between trading. So if I buy Microsoft stock and I sell it tomorrow, I need to wait 3 days after the trade. And that's 3 business days for the market. So if, let's say I sold it today on Friday, that was the T, and now I need to wait Monday, Tuesday, and on Wednesday I can buy more stocks with the funds that have now settled from that original sale. There are tax implications investing in the stock market to be aware of. Revenue is taxed and must be reported. So if you make $1,000 in the stock market, that is treated as any $1,000 you might have made at work that you didn't pay taxes on, so you do need to claim it. On the flip side, if you have a rough year, losses can be deducted up to $3,000 a year with a rollover on excess. So if you lose $6,000 in the stock market this year and you claim that loss on your taxes, it will deduct $3,000 this year, and then the remaining $1,000 will be deducted the following year. There is no limit on that, so if you have a really rough year, you can continue to deduct $3,000 annually. There is an exception there, and that's called a round trip or a superficial loss in Canada. A round trip trade is purchasing essentially the same stock that you just sold within 30 days of a loss. So if I buy Microsoft stock at $100 a share and it drops to 95 and I panic and I sell, then I cannot purchase Microsoft stock again with those funds until at least 30 days has passed. Otherwise, I cannot deduct the loss. If you're interested in the stock market, there's a lot of great resources out there. Yahoo Finance does a really great job of allowing you to build your custom portfolio of which tickers you're tracking, how many shares you have, the fees you paid associated with that, and allows you to kind of track your portfolio in a dynamic fashion. Robinhood, if you're looking to get into trading and perhaps you just want to invest $100, that $9 that you're going to pay to trade is pretty substantial. Robinhood is an app that allows you to trade in the New York Stock Exchange without fees in exchange for using small denominations of money. So if you're looking to get your feet wet with trading and you want to play around with $100 or $50, Robinhood might be a good option for you. And finally, StockTwits is a really interesting social media platform for the stock market. Think Facebook or Twitter, but just for stocks. So you can follow a ticker and find out what people are saying about Facebook or Google or Microsoft's stock price, any associated events coming up, and that kind of thing.
One thing, actually, Brian, if I could just jump in real quick.
Absolutely.
Some people might have a question of what is the stock market, and is this all just a bunch of gambling? And no, it's not. And the way I explain it is it's an analogy. Let's say your grandmother bakes a wonderful pie and she sells it to you for $10 because she's not a very nice grandmother. You cut that into 10 pieces, and you have all 10 pieces. And then my friend says, hey, I want a slice of that pie. You would say, as the owner of that pie, you would say, okay, you can have a slice for $1. Anyway, your grandmother ends up making the world's most amazing pie. So that pie that you spent $10 on and sold one slice of for $1 is now, people are clamoring at you to buy more of it because it's worth so much more. Let's say it's worth $100 today. That means that your friend's slice is now worth $10. The pie in this analogy represents the company. So you buy literally a slice of a company or a share in a company with the expectation that the company will become worth more because either they got a new product or they become more efficient or they become more profitable or whatever. You expect it to become worth more so that when you sell it, you're getting more money for your particular slice of the pie. And so it's definitely not just all gambling. It's very much based on math and expected returns and profitability of a company. But it is a really great way to leverage your current position, investing it wisely, and make a little bit more money in the long run. That's the most simplistic way I can describe of buying and selling shares. I don't know, Brian, does that sound about right to you?
Sounds about right, Craig. And thanks to Josh, too, for the tip on the no commission exchange traded funds. There are certainly several options out there. So if you're interested, start with your bank. Roth IRAs, or tax-free savings accounts in Canada, are another great place to store some money. They are retirement accounts, but they're a little bit different than the 403b or 401k that you receive through your work. There is a $5,500 annual contribution limit. The money is contributed post-tax, meaning you're going to receive your paycheck and then put money into this account. You can typically open one of these up through your bank. And they're advantageous if you assume you're going to make more money later on, if your salary will be higher. The reason for this, of course, is the more money you make, the more you pay in taxes. And so if you feel like at this point I'm probably on the low end of the scale of my salary over my career, this is a good time to pay into a Roth IRA because you're paying lower taxes now. Then you put that money into your Roth account or your TFSA, and watch it grow over the years, and eventually when you withdraw it, it's tax-free. You've already paid taxes on that money. Some other things with the account is you can take back contributions at any time. This can make it a nice house savings account, especially because for a Roth IRA in general, $10,000 can be used to purchase your first home. You're never required to withdraw that money either. Several retirement accounts, as you get older, you are required to withdraw the money in intervals to avoid being taxed on it. And so there are several advantages for a Roth IRA or TFSA, but primarily the advantage is it's encouraging you to save for your future in an accessible manner. So let's look at some examples using $100. These are some different ways for us to spend $100, and we'll go through them here. Now, of course, $100 could be spent on coffee every morning. I think we've more or less exhausted that example, but that's an option. There's another option. We could just put $100 into our mattress for 10 years. In 10 years, it'll be worth $12,000. There's no compounding interest here. And additionally, we're losing money because the price of goods is going to go up over time. The price of our dollar isn't going to be equal. Alternatively, we could put that same $100 into a savings account that pays 1% for 10 years. So this could probably be our easiest option, no stress, secure money, no decision making. I'm going to put it perhaps in that Discover savings account, make 1% on it. It's going to be worth $12,626 in 10 years. So, it's a free $600, which is great. Alternatively, we might decide we want to look at the stock market or an investment account that's going to pay us an 8% annual return for 10 years. At that point, the money is almost up 50% there at $18,417. So really interesting examples for $100 a month for 10 years and what that money can look like. But maybe let's look further. Let's look at our retirement. If you're an entry-level professional, you're just getting started with saving, you put $100 into a shoebox, a very large shoebox, for 35 years. In 35 years, you'll have $131,000 in that giant shoebox. But alternatively, if we look to put it into a retirement account, again, earning an average of an 8% annual return, it's going to be closer to $231,000. So obviously, a huge return on your investment. And there's a rule or an idea out there that once you've saved for retirement and you're ready to retire, you can withdraw 4% of your total retirement savings on an annual basis and not impact the principal amount of your account. So in this example, if we were withdrawing 4%, by us contributing an additional $100 a month, once we retired, we'd actually make an additional almost $800 a month using that 4% rule. So definitely some value there in saving and putting things into an investment account. The sooner you get your debt under control and learn to live by a budget, your takeaway is the sooner you can invest and save your money so that it grows over time without you having to do anything.
So we're going to talk a little bit about how you can apply this to your department. One thing I will mention is that all the stuff we talked about, we laid it out very simply in terms of concepts, but in reality it can be really hard. So I've tried budgeting like literally dozens of times, and dozens of times I've blown my personal budget. It is something that you can try and fail at. I've tried paying down debt quickly, and I have not been successful in the past. It's okay to not get it right the first time, and it's okay to have to reset and restart. That's how you learn what went wrong last time, and you adjust it for the next time. So that's something really important to keep in mind, that mistakes are going to happen. There are going to be months where you go over budget, that kind of stuff. So learn from those mistakes and prevent them from happening in the future. Now, the reason I mention that is that your departments don't necessarily have that same flexibility. You have the flexibility to make big mistakes with your budget and start from scratch. Your department does not, but the concepts we'll talk about are the exact same thing. So the language is the same. The idea is if you can read a children's book today and keep doing it every day, you'll eventually be literate enough to read Game of Thrones, and that's exactly the same is true for fiscal literacy. Good budget, so in a general rule of thumb, is that a good budget should either balance, in other words, the amount of money you said you were going to spend is exactly the same as the amount of money you did spend, or it should run a surplus, which means you say that you're going to spend $100 on something, but you actually only spent $70. That means you had a $30 surplus. At the very least, good budgets allow departments to be responsible and intentional with how they spend their money. So typical budgets are based on a year, but Northwest ACUHO, for example, does a budget on a multi-year cycle because we expect to lose money on the conferences that we hold in farther afield places like Alaska or Alberta or whatever the case may be, but we'll make it up in the following 2 years where we have conferences that are larger and more highly attended in places like Oregon and Washington. And so we're very intentional about that. So we know we're going to lose money, in 2016, but the hope is that we make money in 2017 because we were in Alaska 16, Spokane 17. Register today. Early bird deadline the 13th. Shameless plug. Okay. The next one I want to talk about is the bucket example. So a lot of people, particularly in the public service, although this is true elsewhere as well, look at budgets as a bucket full of money from which they can take money out. So the trouble with that concept is it doesn't show you where that money comes from. I much prefer looking at a budget line where if you say that the budget is $500, the budget bucket is only able to hold $500, and every time I spend $1, I'm tossing $1 in the bucket. So in other words, instead of taking money out of the bucket, I'm putting money in until it's full. The reason I look at it that way is it allows you to be way more intentional with the money. My goal is to make sure that bucket never fills up. If you look at it as a full bucket from which you scoop, you just keep scooping and scooping and scooping until you get to the bottom and you're picking up the pennies and then it's empty. Oh, well, day's over. The trouble with that is all that is student money, or at least a lot of it is in most cases. If you look at it the other way as a bucket that you fill up, in other words, you want to keep that bucket as empty as possible and every dollar you spend is metaphorically a dollar in the bucket, you're a lot more cautious with how you spend that money. You're not afraid to spend it if you need to, but you don't spend it willy-nilly or you don't spend it irresponsibly. And so I find I run my program that way with my unit, my team, and I find that a lot more effective because it means at the end of the year, we usually have surpluses that we can spend on other initiatives that we want to take advantage of. So it allows us a lot more flexibility at year end. What is your department's financial story? So where do your department dollars come from? In other words, what is your department's income? Remember, we talked about that in the personal side. Basically, your department is getting money from student rents, maybe conferencing, maybe dining, all that kind of stuff, but student money at the end of the day. Some folks get money from transfers from other ancillary services. So if your residence is in line with your parking and that kind of stuff, maybe your parking funds your residence operation. And sometimes, it's, fabled happy lands, the main campus actually gives you money. That's not the case in most of Canada, which is why I call it a fabled happy land. But in a lot of places, the main campus actually funds residents as part of the whole student experience. So that's where the income comes from. If your department dollars go for your expenses, well, it goes to building maintenance, staff salary, things. All of this information is shared on a budget. So that's really what tells the story. What is your department's vision of debt? So a lot of times departments take on loans to build new buildings, much the same way that you take on a loan to buy a house. Those are good and healthy loans to have. Usually those loans are pretty good interest rates, or they're underwritten by the government or the university, or whatever the case may be. So that's actually a pretty good deal for your department. And then the next question is, what is your department investing in? So we talked a lot about investing in the stock market and how you can multiply your money and those kinds of things. From a departmental perspective, they're going to be investing in building upgrades, meeting facilities for off-campus guests, hotels or other sorts of services in the slower student months, marketing, recruitment, and your professional development. The more money they put into these kinds of things, the more money they're expected to get later on, because at the end of the day, that will attract more students or more people who will pay money to stay in our halls or park in our parking lots or eat our food or what have you. So that's what your department is investing in. Now, there are a bunch of additional resources on better understanding the departmental fiscal structure. Big one is ACUHO-I core competencies really clearly spells out that fiscal competency and fiscal understanding is one of the things that a housing professional needs to have. So you need to understand money coming in, money going out, and investments and interest rates in order to be able to sit down with the budget and figure it out. If you're a Canadian or an American for that matter, there's a magazine called Money Sense Magazine. It's a really, really good primer on, it's a monthly magazine that basically teaches you everything you need to know about investment and savings and all that kind of stuff. It gives you real world case studies. So it is available. It is a Canadian magazine, but it would apply to a lot of American examples as well. CNN Money is a good website or magazine for our American colleagues that wanted to check that out. National newspapers. A lot of you probably are reading the newspaper, but you might breeze right by the financial section. I would encourage you to stop every once in a while and read the occasional article. If nothing else, it'll get you more familiar with the language of fiscal responsibility or the language of finance, because that's the language they write in. And again, these are habits, and habits get better with practice. There are a bunch of conference sessions like what you'll attend in Spokane. And then finally, engage with the professional associations. So budgeting is really the core of what we do at Northwest ACUHO. Every decision we make is largely dictated by one of two things. First thing being our values, the second thing being our budget. So what do we value? What do we want to spend money on? What do we want to do? And then can we afford it? I know personally, my skill with professional level budgets or departmental level budgets really has increased over the past 5 years that I've been involved with the board of directors. And largely that's because I've had hands-on experience. Even if you're not on the board, though, there's lots of opportunities for you to engage. So at our business meeting in Spokane, which will be streamed if you're not able to attend in person, at our business meeting, we'll be talking about the budget. We'll be going over it. So that's a great time for you to sit down and read through it. It's also a great time to have questions, and it's one of those times where there is no such thing as a silly question. I distinctly remember my first Northwest ACUHO in Vancouver. I had to ask what a CD was, because on the budget, it said, we had so much money in this CD, and I had no idea what that meant. Because in Canada, we don't have CDs, which is certificate of deposit. We have GICs. That question was answered, and I'm like, if that's the only legacy I have in Northwest ACUHO, I'm proud of it. Our budgets now say CD/GIC, so all the Canadians understand what's going on. But there's no such thing as bad questions when you're trying to understand a budget. Remember, this is your association. We want to make sure that all your questions are answered. It's also a great way just to develop that skill set. So thanks everybody for joining us, and it's been a pleasure co-presenting here with Brian. At this time, we've got about 5 minutes left in our schedule to take any questions that you might have, whether it's about the personal finance or the departmental finance. Feel free to type them in the chat box, and Brian and I will jump in. If you're departing for another meeting or whatever the case, whatever you got going on in your schedule, thank you very, very much for attending today, and hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we'll hopefully see some of you in Spokane. Thanks everybody for the kind words. I will say one more time too, don't forget to fill out the feedback form. We're constantly trying to improve these webinars, and you can do so by clicking on the important links on the right-hand side. We'll also email that link out later on.